In this section, we're going to set up a test scene so that we can safely build and test our particle effects and player attacks without accidentally harming our main scene. We don't really want to start building things here in this scene because we might accidentally click or destroy or delete or remove something that we didn't want to. It's always a good idea when we're building something more experimental to do it in its own scene. Additionally, apart from some of the risks of accidentally doing something wrong to this scene, we don't really want to be testing our players' attacks and our particle effects while enemies are constantly spawning and chasing our player around. A test scene is going to allow us to isolate just the parts we want so that we can focus on building just what's important to us at that moment. Another thing we're going to do in this section is we're going to modify our interface to make it easier for us to build our particle systems and particle effects. First things first though, let's go ahead and create a construction scene so that we can build our particle effects. I really want my test scene to have a very similar layout and color and lighting so that I'll know what my particle effects will look like in the finished product. Therefore, I'm actually going to use a copy of this scene. I'm going to start by going to File and then Save Scene As. I'm going to go to my Scenes folder and I'm going to save this as Construct. Now I can see in the top bar, construct.unity. I know I'm in my test scene. Now I'd like to modify a few things because, as I said before, I really don't want my enemies spawning and chasing the player all over the place, and I really want them to behave a little bit differently. Therefore, I'm going to start by clicking on my spawn points game object and deleting it. Now I have to have some enemy in my scene so I can test my attacks out. So I am going to go to my prefabs folder, and then my characters subfolder, and I'm going to locate Zombunny and click and drag it into my scene. I'm going to place it at the origin by right-clicking on the transform and selecting Reset. Now obviously that puts the enemy directly on top of my player, so I'm going to click on the boy game object and just move it back a little bit. The next thing I want to pay attention to is the game manager. Right now, the game manager has the player appropriately assigned to the boy, but it also has this enemy target assigned to the boy. I don't really want my Zombunny chasing my player around, so I really want to remove that enemy target. However, I want that enemy target to exist in some way so that I can test things like the stink attack, which is going to make my enemy run away. The easiest way to do this is I'm going to create a dummy target for the enemy to chase. I'm going to do this by going to the hierarchy window and selecting Create, Create Empty. I'm going to name this game object Dummy Target. I'm going to select the game manager again and assign this new dummy target to the enemy target property, so that the enemy just stands right where it is. I'm going to click on the dummy target and set it to the origin by right-clicking on the transform component and selecting Reset. Now if I hit play to try this out, I'll see that my enemy stands right where it starts. The player can run around and contest shooting and other effects while the enemy leaves it alone. Now that I have my test or construction scene ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look at the interface of the editor. Right now we have the default interface, and that's okay, but we really want to create a more purposeful layout that's going to really help us build our visual effects. One of the things we'll notice is that we have this very large project window that we're really not going to need. The most important part when building visual effects is our scene window and our visual real estate. So let's go ahead and make some modifications. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our project view by shrinking down the size of our icons. We can do that in the lower right hand corner with this little slider bar. I'm going to slide it all the way to the left. Then I'm going to take my console window and I'm going to click and drag it out of the project view and actually dock it right beside the project view. Now it's not really important for me to have this very large console window. Instead, we're going to use the area assigned to this console window for something called a particle effects editor, which we're going to get into later. Another thing is we're not going to need this navigation window. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to right click it and choose Close Tab. Now let's go ahead and grab a particle system and put it in our scene. I'm going to go down to this VFX Reference Prefabs folder and I'm going to grab any particle effect. In this case, lightning hit. Now what we see in our inspector is our particle system with all of the modules. However, we don't always want to see every single module, especially if they're modules we're not using. We can fix this rather easily by looking at the default particle system module, which always has the name of the particle system game object, in this case, lightning hit, and clicking the plus icon on the far right. I'm then going to uncheck Show All Modules. So now I only see the modules that I'm actually using. If I want to add a new module, I can simply do that by clicking on this plus icon and choosing which module I want to add. That saves us a lot of room in our inspector, so we have more space to see the things that are important to us. Now, we don't always want to deal specifically with the inspector window when we're dealing with particle effects. You'll remember that particle effects are several particle systems. It would be a very tedious workflow to have to expand our game object and click on the different child game objects to see their particle system components. Instead, there's a window we can use called the Particle Effects Editor. I can open this editor by looking at the particle system component and clicking the Open Editor button at the top. The Particle Effects Editor is a full window that shows all of the particle systems in a hierarchy. Therefore, I can see the entire particle effect or group of particle systems all at the same time. Now I'm going to take this particle effect window and nest it right down next to the console window, which is why we wanted the console window to take up so much space. Now what we have is we have a list of all of the particle systems in this particle effect. Right below it is our curves editor. Now it's not very useful to have a very short, very wide curves editor. So if we want, we can click up right next to the lock button and the wireframe button and change that to a side-by-side layout. Now we can see our different particle systems with our curves editor to the right. You'll also notice that while I have the particle effect window open, the particle system module in the inspector is minimal. I'm not able to see their modules or modify their properties in the inspector while I have this particle effect window open. If I want to go back to looking in the inspector, all I need to do is click on the console window to bring that to the front, thus hiding the particle effect window, and I can see the particle system in the inspector. Now that I have my layout the way I want, I can go ahead and make a few more modifications to really make this easy to work with. One of the things that's often worth doing is saving favorite folders. In this instance, we have our VFX Reference Prefabs, which is something we might check from time to time. Now granted, that's its own folder right underneath Assets, so it's not very hard to find. In a production environment, however, our visual effects folder could be buried under several other folders, or even spread out all over our project. In that case, it would be fairly difficult to find, and it's a good idea to save those folders as a favorite. I'm going to go ahead and do that now just to show you how it's done and how easy it is. All I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my VFX Reference Prefabs folder and drag it up to the Favorites section. Now, no matter what I have open in my project window, if I click on that Favorites at the very top, it opens up the corresponding folder. I can also save searches like that if I want. I now have my interface and my test scene set up exactly as I want them. So the last thing I'm going to do is to prevent myself from accidentally losing this interface layout. For instance, maybe I open a different project which has a different layout and forces my editor to use that one. Or I accidentally close a window, or I move something. I always want to be able to get back to this layout when I'm dealing with visual effects, and so I'm going to save it. I'm going to do that by going to the upper right hand corner of the editor to the Layout dropdown. And I can see that currently it says Default. I also have a few additional layouts that you won't have. These are ones that I've saved for my own personal use. Let's go ahead and save this layout though. I'm going to go down to the Save Layout option, and I'm going to save this as VFX Layout. And then I'm going to click Save. Now, if I ever change my layout, I can always go to the VFX Layout dropdown and choose the layout I'd like.